Rest and spread are important syntaxes to know. Now I want to dive into another important feature, and that is destructuring. Now let me comment out this code down there, and let's begin with object destructuring. I got my person object, and now let's say we have some code where I only need the name. So I have a new function, print name, let's say, and that actually takes the full person object, because for whatever reason we wrote it like this, or we simply have a function where we are able to get multiple arguments or a full object because some third-party package always gives us that person. We can't change that. So we get the person here, and I only want to console log person.name. Now that is totally fine of doing it like this. I can now execute print name here. Now I need to pass person here. Now to avoid naming confusion, you can name this here however you want. So here we could name it person data, and inside here we use person data. So that function does not use that person. It just expects any person data. We then call that function and pass in that person as an argument. And now if I execute that file, I see max here. This is stemming from this line here. Now, of course, we can absolutely do it like that. And we always get person data because, again, let's say this is a function which is actually called by some third-party package, which is a pattern you see quite a bit throughout this course. Now, therefore, we can't change the data we get. But in this function here, we are only interested in the name. We can then use a syntax or a feature called object destructuring, where we add curly braces here in the argument list, and we then specify the property of the incoming object we are interested in, name. That is this property we have here. Then this will be pulled out of the incoming object. The other properties will be dropped for this function, and it will be stored in a variable named name, which we then can use in there. So now if I execute this again, I also see max. But now we're using this destructuring syntax. And we can pull out the h2 if you wanted to, or the greet function. So that all works, and that is just a syntax we can use that allows us to write a bit of a more understandable code where we are very clear about what we need from the incoming object, and which then gets stored in a local variable that we can just use in this function. And you can, of course, not just use destructuring inside of a function. You can also use it outside of there. You can create a new constant here, for example, and then the syntax will look like this. Curly braces equals person. Curly braces on the left side of the equal sign are something we don't see that often in JavaScript because typically it's wrong, but for destructuring it's correct. And then here we can have the name and the age, and this will create two new constants which hold the values stored in name and age. So these names here have to match the property names of the person. And now we can console log name and age like this. If I now re-execute that file, this output here is coming from this console log, and the values we're outputting here are retrieved via object destructuring. Now there's also not just object destructuring, you can also destructure arrays. So if we go back to the hobbies, which we have here, well then if we would want to destructure that, we can also create a const. You could also use let, by the way, the same for the object destructuring if you plan on changing it. You could use a const for hobby1 and hobby2 wrapped in square brackets, and then assign this to hobbies. And now if you console log hobby1 and you console log hobby2 and you execute that file again, you see the two hobbies being printed there. Please note there are no square brackets around them in the console log because we're not logging an array here. We are logging two individual values which we got via array destructuring. Unlike The object destructuring, here you can choose any names you want, because in arrays your elements have no names. They are instead pulled out by position. So this will always be the first element, this will be the second element. In objects, you pull them out by name, by property name. So that is destructuring, and this is also something used in this course. It simply allows us to access elements in objects or arrays quickly by their name or position, and to drop, and that does not mean delete, they're not getting deleted, they're just not used in our function or whatever we're writing. So to drop the data we don't need in that specific code snippet we're working on.